The following audio is via a Skype call.
Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. Talk radio to thrive by. Powerful, inspiring, and coming to you live, bringing you stories of people like you and me, busting through and living life full out. Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. I'm Dr. Pat. Thank you all for tuning us in and turning us on. Also, welcome to Transformation Talk Radio. And yes, those of you that are listening, every time I say that, I forget to say you probably hear in this show on Transformation Talk Radio, either the Dr. Pat Show, but those of you that pick it up from iHeart, Spotify, and other places, you might be hearing it on one of the other channels. This particular show, you might be hearing on our God Talk channel. But whatever it is, it's us to you, bringing you the best in positive, transformative talk radio, celebrating now our 15th year. And this is no surprise. We have a great lineup for you this week. Lots going on. Linda did a super great job. And we have somebody new at the board helping us out. Nathan, how are you, Nathan?
Doing great. How are you?
Oh, good. So you ready for this week with me?
Yep. Going to sound a little bit different than Benny today.
A little bit. I think you have a little bit deeper voice, maybe. I think you do, but I'm not sure. Listen, I got a book come across my desk, and Linda said to me, hey, take a look at this book. I know this is going to be a book that you're going to want to read, and more importantly, you're going to want to interview. You're going to interview Carl. Carl's joining us here today, Carl McColman, and he is the author of this book, fabulous book. And here it is, The Little Book of Christian Mysticism. And when I got a hold of this book, I thought, okay, let's see. Let's take a look inside. So this is essential wisdom of saints, seers, and sages. And so what Carl has been able to do is pull together over 300 quotations that we can turn to any page in this book, and we will get some information perhaps that you need to have for this day. And I was really astonished when I looked at it and I started to go through the quotes, the sayings, whatever you'd like to call them. I was really amazed. One of my favorite authors was in here, Evelyn Underhill, and I thought, I got to read the rest of this. But today's show is to introduce all of you to this book, introduce you to Carl, and introduce you to be reminded of the fact that this is the time for all of us to connect and to tap in to that which we know is not us, that which we know is a higher power, as some of you call it, some of you call it source energy, whatever you call it. This is a book that taps into, ancient and not so ancient Christian mysticism. And it's so great to have Carl joining us here today as the author of this. Carl, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pat. It's a privilege to be here.
Okay, so I always love to find out more about people that write books like this. And the reason I say that, you're thinking, okay, what does she want to know about me? Here's the thing. I am of course, the host of the Dr. Pat Show, but I'm also the owner of TransformationRadio.fm. And when I announced what we were building, initially 10 channels, 10 unique channels with 10 different topics, we now have 2 of them launched. This year, we will launch another 4. When I told the world what we were launching, everybody nodded, and then they saw God Talk Radio. And what was interesting was the different response I got back from that, and also the quote that I put out there when I announced the channel. God is either everything or God is nothing. What will you choose? And so today, as a storyteller, as a soul friend, you are somebody that has captured some of the most illuminating messages, if I can call them that, of our time to remind us that we don't have to take this journey alone, that we can be divinely guided. How did you, Carl, become you?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah,
so I'll try to give you the 50-cent version.
Oh, we got an hour. We have an hour, and I can skip breaks. So go
let's have some fun here. And first of all, I want to join you in your love for Evelyn Underhill. Mm-hmm. And my journey into the Christian wisdom tradition or Christian mysticism, however you want to frame it, really began with this wonderful British 20th century wisdom teacher, Evelyn Underhill. When I was right after I graduated from high school, so this was, a few years back, I had a dream about the world coming to an end. And it was, you could say, well, you just graduated from high school, getting ready to move away from home to go to college for the first time. Of course, my world was coming to an end. But, I was kind of a shy, introverted little 18-year-old, and I wasn't savvy enough to see it in that way. So it kind of rocked my world a little. And I turned to a friend of mine who was a few years older, maybe a few years wiser, and shared this dream and, just kind of what was going on in my heart. And this older friend said, I have a book that you need to read.
Yeah.
And he gave me Evelyn Underhill's book, which came out in 1911. It was called Mysticism, a study in the nature and development of spiritual consciousness.
Yes.
And I started reading that book, and talk about a book that rocked my world. And, I grew up in a very nice kind of American middle-class family in the 60s and 70s. We were Lutherans, so we were churchgoers. So, going to church was part of my life. But I think like so many people, religion was more knowing about God rather than an initiation into knowing God. And so
I love that.
For me, reading Evelyn Underhill, and she just talks about how there is this lineage, this wisdom tradition that goes back centuries, and that is just, men and women who have so deeply fallen in love with the God who is not just up in heaven, but the God who radiates from our hearts. And so, so like I said, this book just rocked my world. And I think like so many young people of the day, I was interested in Eastern spirituality, Buddhism and Hinduism and those kinds of things. And I still am. I still love all the wisdom traditions of the world. But there was something really meaningful for me to discover that, yes, this path that I grew up in has its own mystical wisdom. So I just became a student of it. And, I'm sure you're familiar with Anne Lamott, amazing writer. I heard a talk she gave a few years back on public radio, and she said, my advice to writers, write the book you wish you could have read.
Yeah.
Write the book you wish you could have read. And that was really good advice to me. And so I sat and thought about it, reflected, meditated a little bit, and I realized, and this was in, like around 27 or so, 10 or 11 years ago. And I thought, the book I wish I could read would be if Evelyn Underhill's book had been published today.
Yeah.
Because her book is wonderful, but it is a little, it's a little aged. It shows its age. It's over 100 years old now. So I worked on this book for 3 years, and it was, by the grace of God, it was published in 2010, and it was called The Big Book of Christian Mysticism. So, and it's a book about the wisdom tradition that is native to the Christian world. And so that just, it opened up some doors for me, helped me to connect with a lot of interesting people, and of course do some great work. I have been, for years now, I've been a student of Trappist monks. I'm sure people might be familiar with Thomas Merton or Thomas.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I've been studying with the Trappist here in Georgia where I live. And just, all along, just the idea that it would be fun to do another book where I could just showcase the mystics and let them speak for themselves. Yeah, and so, my editor said to me a couple of years after the first book came out, he said, we need to do another one. And he said, so you've done the big book, now how about the little book? So, and so here it is.
Oh, I want to call it the little big book, though, if I may. I would call it the little big book because there's not very much that's little about this, except perhaps for, I don't know, the pages or, maybe the fact that there's beautiful white space on it. Powerful is perhaps a great way to describe what you've selected to go in this book. Because, I'm kind of like you. I often wonder how a book, like that's called mysticism or practical mysticism ends up in my life, with my background growing up, Catholic and Southern Baptist at the same time. And then, of course, like you, I ventured out a little bit. But they do show up. And I think they show up, and we're going to talk about this today because of what you say here, essential wisdom. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Carl about what this essential wisdom is. But we're going to take a dive into this idea of Christian mysticism. What exactly is it? And what is it about the messages in this book? No matter what page you go to, it doesn't matter what page you go to, there is something here for you. And if you're like me, you can't just get through reading the message once. You probably have to go through and read it again. When we come back, we're going to talk about what this essential wisdom is and how does it help us get through the maze that we call our life in contemporary times today. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back.
When I die and I lay me to rest, gonna go to the place that's the best. When I lay me down to die, going up to the Styrian sky.
Stay juicy. Tune in to Your Juicy Love with me, Una Drake, co-hosting monthly with Dr. Pat, and every second Monday at 12 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio. My show, Your Juicy Love, helps you find the dynamic, life-affirming love you've always wanted. Transform your relationships and bring peace, joy, and juicy, juicy love to planet Earth. For more information, visit unadrake.com.
Tune in to the hit show Raging Skillet Radio, Mouthing Off with Chef Rossi. Chef Rossi mouths off about different subjects in pursuit of breaking down walls and opening up your minds. She and Dr. Pat banter back and forth, taking from the headlines of the day on subjects that reach beyond what goes on in the world into your hearts. And go to theragingskillet.com to find out more and let Chef Rossi know what's on your mind.
This is Debbie Pokornik with a moment for standing in your power. Self-control begins with noticing how different feelings present themselves in your body. When you're feeling sensitive, for example, your chin might quiver, tears might well up in your eyes, and your voice might catch in your throat. Anger, on the other hand, might appear as tension in your jaw, back, or arms, along with clenched fists, heat in the upper torso, scowling, and a strong desire to yell. The more aware you become of your body cues, the easier it will be to recognize when you're on the road to disaster. Choose the emotions that cause you problems, then start noticing and logging the body cues that come with them.
For information and to work with Debbie, visit empoweringnrg.com. That's empoweringnrg.com.
Winning at the game of money. Lynn Brown is now offering Full Spectrum Finance, a progressive 12-month program that will help you to navigate through the mechanics of financial expansion. Finally, a financial planner who looks at the full spectrum of money and abundance. Engage you in the mental, physical, and energetic aspects of finance. This is Full Spectrum Finance. Are you ready to get into it? For more information, go to fullspectrumfinance.com.
Tune in to Mainstream Metaphysics Radio to harness your connection with the universe to effect change for optimal success and happiness.
Named one of the country's top psychics, Eve now brings her insights and gifts to this weekly hit call-in show, joined by visionaries, leaders, and gifted others, but mostly you. Jot it down, Thursdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's so great to have all of you tune us in and turn us on. What a great conversation here today with Carl. And we're going to take you on a journey, if we could. We were talking during the break of, at least me, it's like, how does this girl from the Bronx get her hands on mysticism, get by Underwood, or anything by Emma Curtis Hopkins, or somebody like Emmett Fox? I mean, how does any of that end up in my hands? But, Carl, it's not how it ends up in our hands. It does end up in our hands because I think we're meant to go on a journey. And I wanted to ask you this. Here we are, mysticism. We're talking about it now. I think it is one of the most misunderstood, or shall I say least understood words. Can you talk about that for a minute and the difference between mysticism and Christian mysticism?
Sure. Well, and our friend Evelyn Underhill 100 years ago, she talked even then about how this word means so many different things to many different people. It's a word like love, or like justice. There's different shades of meaning, and how do we find kind of the heart or the center of it? And so I like to go back to the root of a word. And so the word mysticism comes from the same Greek word that we get mystery, and also that we get mute, like the mute button on our cell phone or on our TV remote. So it has something to do with silence. And it has something to do with the mystery with a capital M. Once again, the divine, spirit, God, they're different names because it's ultimately beyond all names. And so this mystery calls us into a place that we can't put into words. And I think that's where the silence piece comes in. And one thing that I think is so important is that the mystical wisdoms of the world all call us into meditation, and they all call us into contemplation, and they all call us into silence. And it's like one of the great teachers of the West, and we don't know the person's name, but they wrote a book called The Cloud of Unknowing. They say God can never be fully known, but God can be fully loved. And so, so mysticism represents this kind of sinking from the head into the heart, so that the heart center becomes the point of contact. And truly, God is already there. This is the thing. I think we oftentimes get this kind of idea, this notion that God is way out there somewhere. And yet the mystics all point us, inquire within. That's their motto, this point at the heart. So to briefly talk about the difference between mysticism in a general sense and Christian mysticism, mysticism is a word like yoga or meditation. There are a number of things that are universal. You can be a Muslim and practice yoga. You can be a Christian and practice yoga, a Jew and practice yoga. Yoga may have its roots in the Hindu world, but it has become a global, universal practice. Same thing with meditation. And so mysticism appears in all of the world's wisdom traditions. Now, it takes different shapes and forms because there are different cultures and maybe different stories, different teachings. But the heart is always the same. And that heart is that silent place where light and darkness kind of are not two. It's a place of deep non-duality. And it's a place where me and God are not two. And it's a place where me and you are not two. So it's a place of deep union. And I should also mention deep transformation and deep joy.
Yeah. I love this. I remember at first reading, and I think it was in Evelyn's book, of her reference when she talked about mysticism, her reference to Walt Whitman. And right away, I didn't know Walt Whitman what. And I grabbed Walt Whitman and I started to look at Leaves of Grass, which is a very big book. But there was one verse in Leaves of Grass that was just so beautiful. And, it kind of ties it back together for me. There's a practical nature to this that she talks about, and also that you reference by what you've selected for your book. And it's this notion of dismiss whatever insults your soul. Mm-hmm. And, I was thinking about this as I was going through your book for today. And I was thinking about how so many people in the day and age we live in are really concerned, confused. And yet, if they could just stop for a moment, open any page of your book, doesn't matter what it is, and take a moment to just stop and read and take in just 5 lines, maybe 5 lines in your book that have something important. Like today, I opened up the book from Isaac the Syrian, and I opened up and it says, "Be at peace with your own soul, then heaven and earth will be at peace with you. Eagerly enter into the treasure house that is within you, and so you will see the things that are in heaven, for there is but one single entry to them both. The ladder that leads to the kingdom is hidden within your soul." Mm-hmm. And I just thought, man, that is really powerful.
That could be the whole book right there.
Yes, it could.
You could spend, I don't know how long, the rest of your life maybe, just really reflecting on that and reflecting on what it means to receive that one jewel of wisdom from this bishop in what is modern day Syria from 1300 years ago, and those are the jewels that are hidden throughout our history that oftentimes we aren't aware that this wisdom is right there at our fingertips. So part of the reason why I wanted to do this book was to introduce people to some of these amazing wisdom teachers and the insights that they have for us. For many folks, they may not have heard of many of the people in this book. So really what it does is it opens a doorway for folks to say, yeah, now there's Google. When you get the copy of the book, then what you could do is say, wait a minute, let me find out more about Underhill. Or maybe let's take a look at, Isaac the Syrian maybe, or some of the others in the book. It makes you want to find out more about more, right? Well, and the mystics, they're almost like poets, and I love poetry. And of course, the thing about loving poetry is I could spend my whole day just reading poetry. And there's I was just you mentioned being from the Bronx. I was just in Manhattan over the weekend. I was teaching at the New York Open Center. Shout out to them. And I'm going to make another shout out to the Strand Bookstore in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm in New York, I always try to stop by there because they have a whole wall of poetry, which it's like a kid in a candy store, and so, but and poets and mystics, a lot of the mystics were poets. It's interesting that I went there, and I think it's because poetry is like mysticism in that it's language that invites us beyond language, words that invite us beyond words. Poetry invites us back into our senses, back into our body, back into the wisdom of our heart, into the wisdom of deep intuition. And this is something that I think the mystics also remind us, is that everything we need is already in our hearts. It's already encoded in our bodies, in our DNA. And, and I don't know, if you're like me or not, but I'm the kind of guy I'm kind of a slow learner, and I
am too.
I kind of klutz my way through life. And so, so I'm so glad that we have these amazing wisdom teachers, and not just in the Christian tradition. I want to be real clear about that. There are great Buddhist teachers and Sufi masters and Kabbalists. And, the world is just filled with these amazing teachers. But this particular book is shining a light on one tradition that often people don't realize that it has its own wisdom lineage too. Mm-hmm. And, and then we can turn to these people. And like you say, it's just find a sentence or a paragraph from one of their writings from, 500 years ago. And you read it and it's just like, suddenly you're transformed. You're just brought into this more, expanded consciousness. And that's really, really exciting. And then, and I know this is something that's important for you and your work.
Yeah.
Then we bring it back into our lives,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, you have to.
We can live from a place, from a higher consciousness. We can live from a consciousness that is anchored in compassion and wisdom and relationship and kindness. And that, that when we find that royal throne in our heart and we live from there, everything changes. And that's not to say there's no more suffering. I mean, life has its ups and downs. But even when we come into the hard places, we come in from a place of deep joy and deep trust and the ability to bring light into the darkest corners.
Yeah, and I think this is what I want to talk about when we come back from break. For me, I look back at, my early childhood and what I was exposed to, both in Catholicism and Christianity, in the Southern Baptist Church. And I look at the evolution now of what I believe and how I've opened up to many traditions. But the one thing I have noticed across the board that has changed in my life, and I want to talk about this when we come back, there's this, just like our network, there's this new positivity to spiritual practice. It's a new positivity, and especially in Christian mysticism and in some of the Christian traditions. So much so that, out there in the world, some of the Christian pastors that are out there now on TV are actually mistaken for not actually being Christian. When we come back, we're going to talk about how that is. They are actually. Joel Osteen for years was thought to be a New Thought minister. When we come back, we're going to talk about this idea of all being universal. And Carl's going to share a few of his favorites with us, and I've got a few of mine. How did Meister Eckhart get in here? I'm going to ask Carl. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Take your own journey with the angels with Claire Candy Hoff's Heaven Sent Guided Angel Meditation CD. Letting go of concerns and living in the now. This beautiful CD walks listeners through practical exercises to help free them from the burdens, worries, and concerns of daily life.
Walking a quarter of the way across the bridge, you see a bright, emerald green light and sense a loving presence. This is Archangel Raphael's green healing energies, nourishing and revitalizing you. Take a moment now to bathe in this green healing light.
Giving you much more than just relaxation and stress release, this wonderfully narrated CD provides vivid visualization, soothing and inspiring music, and an angel's choir that will bring you peace, clarity, and a newfound awareness. Visit angelhealinghouse.com today.
Interested in deepening your spiritual practice? The School for Esoteric Studies offers online training to spiritual seekers from all paths of life and individual coaching. Our courses synthesize Eastern and Western spiritual traditions based on meditation, study, and service applied to everyday life. To learn more about our courses and services, please visit www.esotericstudies.net. Defining success and putting minds to work. With the Higher Learners Career and Leadership Series, Rudy Racine will help you craft your personal definition of success, offering support and guidance as you move forward towards your goals. Take the leap. With the right mix of focus and motivation, anything can be achieved. Tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern, and for more information on Rudy Ray Seed and Higher Learners, visit Rudy's site at higherlearners.com. That's HIRE learners.com.
Knowledge Book Radio with Marge Potasic has a special gift for everyone out there. To receive 3 chapters of the Knowledge Book as a special gift, send your email to mmjp99@gmail.com. That's M as in Mary, JP99@gmail.com now to receive this fabulous, fabulous gift of the Knowledge Book.
To find answers to life's questions, you need to look within yourself. Dr. Glenna Rice brings your questionable conversations on Transformation Talk Radio each month. Tune in each month for insight into how you can live up to your full potential. Dr. Glenna is a physical therapist, certified Access Consciousness, and Access Body Class facilitator. How does it get any better than this? For more information on Dr. Glenna Rice and her work, visit glennarice.com.
Hey, everybody. Listen, you have any questions for us? Give us a call, 1-800-930-2819. Or you could also go to the Dr. Pat Show and please ask your question. We'll get your question on here for Carl. Carl, how can people, one, find out more about you, but also how can they get their own copy of the book?
Well, the book is available through, all the major online retailers and local bookstores as well. I strongly supporting your neighborhood bookstore, but you can also get it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and so forth. You can also order books through my personal website and connect with me. It's carlmccolman.com. That's CarlMcColman.com. And from there, you can also connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, the usual suspects. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah. And then, listen, do you still have your podcast? I know at one point you had a podcast.
Yes. It's relatively new. We've only been doing it for about 4 months now, but I'm a team of 3 people who are doing a podcast called Encountering Silence. Encountering Silence. And it obviously, we do look at the mystical dimension of silence, but it's also looking at poetry and art and health and psychology, so it's a more holistic approach. EncounteringSilence.com, but again, it's available through Google Play or Apple Podcasts, any of the regular podcast sources.
Yeah.
So,
Nathan, I'm going to give you a challenge to find Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel for our break. Okay, 2 questions for you, right? Mm-hmm. One, I kind of jokingly said before break, how did Meister Eckhart end up in this book? Well, actually, there's a reason. But most importantly, you've selected these. So obviously, some of these call to you more than others. I can't imagine how you selected these. You know what I mean? How did you actually just limit it to these? You know what I mean? I'm like...
That was the harder task. I wrote a book that came out, I guess, last year, 2 years ago, called Christian Mystics, 108 Seers, Saints, and Sages. So it's also, that's a book. It's kind of like Butler's Lives of the Saints. This is Carl's Stories of the Mystics. And I limited it to 108, and there were almost as many that didn't get in the book as did. I could probably do a volume 2 at some point if I wanted to. But, so there are, these amazing voices throughout the tradition, including some people that are still alive. This isn't just a museum piece. But to answer your question, I followed my heart. So there's certain people whose whose works I really love, Julian of Norwich, Evelyn Underhill, of course, Bernard of Clairvaux, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. I know some of these names may not be household names, but boy, you start, especially if you're interested in consciousness and wisdom, you start reading these folks and it's just amazing. So obviously I kind of focused on some of my favorites. And then with the others, just, doing a little bit of research, doing a lot of reading, doing some searching online. And just looking for those jewels, those diamond quotations that just lit up the page. And whenever I ran across something like that, I just tried to include it. And the book, I should mention, the book is organized in a way to induct the reader throughout kind of the ordinary process of mystical formation, at least in the Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. So it begins with longing. Our hearts long for the divine, for holy, for God. I think it was Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And so it starts in that place of longing and takes us all the way through to the place of complete union. And of course, the joke is, maybe it's not a joke, but the punchline is that the union was there all along, but we forget, or we miss it, and so all of the mystics are just pointing us back, to this. So at any rate, I don't know if that answers your question.
I get what you're saying, because this is really, as I mentioned earlier, we are talking about the journey, and life is a journey, and I think often we don't stop long enough to get a reminder about what the promises really are. Because, I think I asked you a question before the break where I said, what has changed? What has changed in the view of Christian mysticism that you can tell in the past 50, 60 years? Have you seen a change? And if so, what would you attribute it to?
Well, yes, there definitely has been a change. And I think that probably the single most positive thing has been the emergence of the global village. And the fact that we live in the age of the internet, we live in the age of the jet airline, and you can get anywhere in the world in 12 to 24 hours. Through Skype. I mean, here you and I are Skyping, or just pick up your iPhone and you can talk all over the world. And I think the fact that, and I don't want to get into a lot of the history, but Christianity as a religion really lost its own mystical heart for a number of centuries. And there is some history to this, but it's I think a lot of people, maybe a lot of your listeners, oftentimes the experience of growing up in a church is that, okay, the message is be a good boy, be a good girl, and then you get to go to heaven after you die. But it's like there's not a lot of meat on the bones, and it's like, is this all there is? And I think this is why many people leave Christianity and then they go and they embrace, Buddhism or Sufism or, some of the other, more kind of vibrant mystical traditions or wisdom traditions that are out there. But in the meantime, I think that, and this is very interesting, and that the Christians, as Christians began to encounter Buddhists and yogis and Sufi masters and some of these wisdom lineage holders from other traditions, they often would say to the Christians, you need to go back and uncover your own heritage. One of my teachers was an Episcopal priest who studied for several months with a Tibetan Buddhist priest. And then he wanted to leave the Episcopal priesthood and just become a Buddhist. And the Buddhist priest wouldn't let him. The Buddhist priest said, no, you are already a priest. You are a priest of Christ. I am a priest of Buddha. We are brother priests. He said, but you need to go back and find the treasure that's been hidden. And so, you mentioned, Emma Hopkins, Evelyn Underhill, Thomas Merton, there's Teilhard de Chardin. There's a number of these figures, and they're across all the paths: Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Evangelical, New Thought. You find them throughout the Christian world that are just, I think, we're doing that work, or began doing that work, looking back, okay, what was happening 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, and then finding this wisdom. It's been there all along, but it's like it's been hidden. And so I think the last 50 or 60 years has represented what I would say mysticism or deep spirituality has been sprung free from the convents and the monasteries, where at least in the Catholic and the Orthodox world, it kind of was locked up for centuries. And now it's in the air, it's on the web. It's, so many churches, you go to the churches and they have yoga classes, they have Zen classes, they have centering prayer classes. It's like your local neighborhood churches are becoming spirituality centers. And it's just, even 30 years ago, that was really unusual. And it's becoming more and more the norm, and not just in the big cities, not just in LA and San Francisco and New York, it's happening everywhere. And I, it's the movement of the Spirit. It's the movement of grace and love with a capital G and a capital L. But I really do think that East-West encounter was the spark that lit the flame.
Yeah. And you know what I love about this too is, when we look at this, there is an openness now that we're all seeing that is represented, I think, of the younger generations of people coming through. What I mean by that is a guy like Joel Osteen, for example, one example, down in Texas, the whole thing, Houston gets flooded out. And what does he do? He opens up his church for people in the Jewish tradition to come in, because their temple's flooded, to come in and do their services there. Now, see, for me, that's something that is like breathing for him. If you go back in time, there wasn't quite that kind, my knowledge of, there wasn't quite that. You know what I mean? And this is something we're seeing. We're seeing cross movement in spiritual traditions. I want to ask you this question. We have a new pope, not so new, but we have a new pope.
4 years now. Yeah.
Okay,
Pope
not
Francis.
So new, right? I mean, he's not. He's not like
5 years now, but he's the latest guy. Yeah.
He's the latest guy. Some people say he's the greatest guy, and I want to ask you, what is it about, I shouldn't be talking about the Pope like guy, but you know what I'm saying.
It's okay.
There's my old Catholic tradition. But they are looking at him kind of the way that they look at the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is somebody special, even if you don't know. I mean, you put the Dalai Lama in the largest baseball stadium in the world, and it's filled.
Yeah.
They're looking at him in the same way. I'd love to know from your perspective why you think that is.
Well, I think that Pope Francis is the real deal. In fact, there has been a lot of people writing about, looking at his writings and his interviews, and the general consensus is that this guy, is a true mystic. He is somebody who is truly in touch with the presence of divine love, the Holy Spirit, however you want to frame it, in his own heart. And like all true mystics, then he just wants to give it away, and he's got a heart that's as big as the planet. He's got a heart for the poor. He's got a heart for the disabled. He's got a heart for Muslims. He's got a heart for gays and lesbians. He's got a heart for everybody. And, and there are a lot of the old guard that are kind of freaked out about this. It's like, whoa, I thought we were all about the rules. And, and I don't think he's anti-rules, but I think he understands that love always comes first. And that's, to me, that's the exciting message. And I think this is, when you talk about these great leaders that don't fit into any one box, that's what they all have in common, is that they're all motivated by love. And then you talk about the young people, and they're, a lot of young people are just not interested in institutional religion. They say, I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm spiritually independent. There are different ways that they might identify themselves. And I think that what you've got there is not a rejection of religion so much as an embracing of spirituality. and that it's just this recognition is that when we move into the realm of deep spirituality, most of the containers just aren't big enough, and so so it's like, I'm interested in the Dalai Lama, I'm interested in Pope Francis, I want to learn from all these different teachers who have so much wisdom. Now, I'm a little bit of an old-fashioned guy in that I think the container still has its place, and so so I still kind of am laboring in the vineyard, but I think that. And if you want to talk about like institutional religion, I think institutional religion is going through a very deep transformation right now. There was a writer, she died a couple of years ago. Her name was Phyllis Tickle, and she wrote this amazing book called The Great Emergence. And it was about Christianity, but she said, if you look at history, Christianity has a transformation every 500 years. First you had Jesus, and then 500 years later you had Saint Benedict, and you had the emergence of the monastic, and I should say the mystical tradition. Then in the year 1000 you have the split between Orthodox and Catholic, and in the year 1500 you have the split between Catholic and Protestant.
Yeah.
So we're due. It's time for the next transformation. Right. And I think we're just seeing the beginnings of it.
I agree. I agree.
We have not even begun to imagine the amazing transformation, not only of individual consciousness, but of collective consciousness that I think is going to be happening. And so it's an exciting time to be alive, and it's an exciting time to be somebody who is committed to the conscious evolution of our own individual spirit. And then to bring that out into the public sphere, it's like, how can I be of service to humanity at large? It's a very exciting question.
Yeah, I love the way that you're talking about that, because I think you're right. We're going through an evolution at many, many levels. I mean, it's not just from the position of Christianity, but what was once known, and I put this in quotes, as New Thought churches and centers. They are and have moved back towards a center point. And what I mean by that is you'll hear conversations about the Bible. You'll hear conversations about Jesus. You'll hear sermons about different things. So, there's this movement that's happening that represents in my mind harmony, harmony.
Yes.
Right? And I couldn't think of another word. I was reading one of the quotes in the book, and I can't remember exactly who it was. Maybe Edith Stein. And, I think the quote talks about, the spiritual vision getting clearer. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people wanting and longing for a connection that they're not getting on their cell phone. Connection that they're not getting on their iPad, iPod, or whatever it is, anything.
Social media and smartphones and all that, they have their function. I'm not anti-technology, but I think you're right that it's a limited function, and that we need human touch, we need contact, we need fellowship, we need love and kindness and tenderness, we need community. And I think that our culture kind of lost its way for a while in terms of community, and I think there's still some work to be done. But like you, I think there's also a lot of really positive signs out there, and I'm very, very impressed with young people and with their hunger for meaningful connection, and also for connection that makes a difference. That it's not just, I want to get together with people who look like me and think like me, and we can all be in a little clubhouse. But it's more, I want to reach out. I want to reach out to people who don't look like me, people of different gender or different orientation or different ethnicity, speak different languages or follow different paths. And, and it's just exciting to watch and to see how people are building new forms of community. So, it's, and one of the things that I should also mention, and sure, you're probably just picking this up, but I think that if you really immerse yourself into the wisdom of the Christian mystics, you become profoundly optimistic.
That's what I was trying to say before.
Yeah. And that's not to say that there isn't work to be done. You know, life has its challenges, but you face all the challenges in your life, whether they're personal challenges or even the big challenges, you know, like global warming and that kind of thing. But we face the challenges out of this deep center of faith and trust and hope. And that makes all the difference. You know, then it becomes an adventure. You know, we can really make a difference here. You know? Exactly.
And I think that's for me, when I sit back and I look at, you know, being around here a few decades, one of the things I know that I've experienced in my own life is going from fire and brimstone, part of my early childhood, now to living the promises. And there's so many of them. You know, we're being reminded that these promises have been made, and all we have to do is ask, or we have to contemplate, or we have to focus, whatever the language is. Carl, thank you so much for today. One more time, how can we get a copy of the book? And also, please, let's have your website. And then I'd love to know what your personal message is.
Yeah. Well, you can find my books through my website or through all of the major online retailers or your local bookstore. My website, www.carlmccolman, that's CarlMcColman.com. And for my personal message, I'm just going to borrow a line from one of my favorite mystics. And this was a woman who lived in the 14th century. Her name was Julian of Norwich. And she said, "The fullness of joy is to behold God in all." The fullness of joy is to behold God in all. And I believe that when we step into that wisdom, literally everything changes and everything becomes possible.
And thank you for this. And also, Carl, thank you for including in the book sort of a glossary or appendix, so to speak, of the people that you've put in the book, as well as some of the readings that you have. What's next on the horizon for you?
Well, my next book will be out this fall, and it's an invitation to Celtic wisdom. And I'm working on another one, so, you know, it never stops. I travel usually just one weekend a month because I also work in my church community here in Georgia. And, of course, I'm writing and blogging, and I'm doing my podcast. So you can always find me online.
I'd love to. Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing. And the book is The Little Book of Christian Mysticism, Essential Wisdom of Saints, Seers, and Sages. It's fabulous. We're going to take a short break, everyone. We will be right back.